On the highest point overlooking Gull Lake in southwestern Michigan, rising 110 feet above the water, stands a Tudor-style palace covering 15,000 square feet. Its builder, one of the wealthiest men in America, called it simply the cottage. The name was misleading. Nothing about the estate was modest, and nothing about the man who built it suggested he was destined to own such a place. For the first 46 years of his life, he lived as a servant. He worked exhausting hours for minimal pay. He took dictation while his employer sat on the toilet. He ran alongside a bicycle with a notebook in hand, ready to capture any passing thought. That employer was not a stranger. It was his own brother. Then, in 1906, everything changed. The servant became a titan of industry. The invisible bookkeeper built a company that would place his name on breakfast tables across America and eventually around the world. By the time he constructed this lakeside estate in 1925, W.K. Kellogg was a household name. His brother, the famous doctor who had once treated presidents and industrial legends, was suing him for the right to use their shared family name. The two men would fight in court for years and barely speak for decades. In the final days of the older brother's life, a letter of reconciliation would arrive at this very house. W.K. Kellogg never opened it, not until it was too late. This is a story about cornflakes, family betrayal, and the hidden cost of success. And it begins here at the cottage by the lake. In 1925, W.K. Kellogg was 65 years old and rich beyond imagination. His cornflakes company was producing more than 120,000 boxes every single day. After a lifetime of poverty and submission, he finally decided to build something for himself. He chose a site 15 miles from Battle Creek, perched on the highest elevation overlooking Gull Lake. The property covered 32 acres and included 1,600 feet of private shoreline. Kellogg hired the architectural firm Benjamin & Benjamin of Grand Rapids and asked for a house that looked as though it had stood there for centuries. The result was a neo-Tudor masterpiece. The exterior featured authentic half-timbered walls and stucco panels, just like an English manor house. Leaded glass windows bearing heraldic shields caught the morning light from the lake. The roof was clad in expensive imported Ludowici tiles, crowned with terracotta chimney finials that gave the house its distinctly old-world character. But Kellogg didn't stop with the house. He transformed the entire property into a gentleman's estate. A decorative yet perfectly detailed Dutch windmill rose from the grounds. A greenhouse produced roses, citrus fruits, and flowers year-round, supplying fresh bouquets daily. A boathouse sat along the water, and elsewhere on the property, a pagoda added an unexpected Eastern accent to the carefully constructed English landscape. Kellogg was impatient. When landscapers suggested planting young trees that would mature over time, he refused. "At my age," he said, "you can't wait for trees to grow." He ordered fully grown trees transplanted onto the land instead. He wanted his paradise complete, and he wanted it immediately. After decades spent watching others enjoy the rewards of his labor, especially his brother, Kellogg finally had something that belonged entirely to him. He called it the cottage. Whether the name reflected humility or private irony is unclear. Perhaps it was both. To a man who had grown up with nothing and been expected to remain nothing, this Tudor palace by the lake was simply a place of his own. To understand how he came to build it, we must go back to where everything began. We must return to Battle Creek and to the two brothers whose bond would shape American breakfast and whose resentment would last a lifetime.
In the 1860s, Battle Creek, Michigan was no ordinary town. While much of the nation recovered from the Civil War and chased industrial fortunes, this small city became the spiritual headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. Its followers believed the second coming of Christ was imminent. They rejected meat, alcohol, tobacco, coffee, and tea. They observed the Sabbath on Saturday and believed the human body was a sacred temple that must be kept pure for the Lord's return. In this environment, John Preston Kellogg raised his family while making brooms for a living. He and his wife had 16 children. 6 died from infectious disease. Those who survived grew up surrounded by religious devotion and constant anxiety about health, death, and divine judgment. John Harvey Kellogg was born on February 26, 1852. As a child, he contracted tuberculosis, leaving one lung permanently damaged. But despite his fragile health, his intellect was unmistakable. Church leaders noticed his brilliance early and chose to invest in him. 8 years later, on April 7, 1860, Will Keith Kellogg was born. He was the 7th of the 16 children, and from the beginning, his path diverged sharply from his brothers. Where John Harvey was celebrated, Will Keith was overlooked. Where John Harvey received opportunity, Will Keith received chores and low expectations. The problem was his eyesight. Will Keith could barely see the blackboard at school, and teachers assumed he was slow. His family believed the same. No one thought to test his vision. The boy who would one day build a global business empire spent his childhood labeled as the family disappointment. At 13, Will Keith dropped out of school. His father sent him door-to-door selling brooms. He learned how to pitch to skeptical customers, how to handle rejection, and how to calculate margins. Meanwhile, his older brother was being sent away to medical school. John Harvey's rise was swift and dramatic. Sponsored by the church, he studied health science in New Jersey, medicine at the University of Michigan, and finally at Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York City. In 1876, at just 24 years old, he returned to Battle Creek as a fully credentialed physician and assumed control of the struggling Western Health Reform Institute. He renamed it the Battle Creek Medical Surgical Sanitarium. The word sanitarium was his own invention. It would soon become one of the most famous institutions in America.
That same year, 16-year-old Will Keith Kellogg walked through its doors, not as a patient, but as an employee. John Harvey needed someone to manage the books and correspondence. Will Keith needed work. What seemed like a temporary arrangement would last a quarter of a century. At 46, Will Keith Kellogg had nothing to show for a lifetime of work except exhaustion. Every productive year of his adulthood had been spent enriching other people. Then, on February 19, 1906, he did something unprecedented for himself. He formed the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company and purchased his brother's share of the cereal operation. For the first time, his labor would belong to him. His older brother barely reacted. The sanitarium was flourishing, patients filled its halls, and cereal remained a footnote in his mind, merely a digestive aid, not a commercial future. He let Will take the cereal and return to his mission of reshaping American health, convinced that medicine, not markets, would secure his legacy. Will saw what John never could. Americans were not looking for discipline at the breakfast table. They wanted pleasure. He altered the formula, adding sweetness and salt, turning a medicinal food into something people actually craved. His brother would have objected fiercely, but authority had shifted. The rules were no longer his to enforce. Then Will made a gamble that defined modern advertising. He spent nearly a third of his entire startup budget on a single national advertisement in Ladies' Home Journal. The promotion instructed women to wink at their grocer. Any grocer who received the signal was required to hand over a free box of cornflakes. The idea was playful, simple, and irresistible. The response was explosive. In New York City, demand multiplied almost overnight. Will doubled down. More advertisements, more giveaways, more visibility. He understood the new century intuitively. Success no longer belonged to the best product, but to the loudest one. He also did something deeply personal. He signed every box. His name appeared boldly on the packaging, not as a brand, but as a promise. That signature transformed cereal into trust, and it endures more than a century later.
From a distance, John Harvey watched his younger brother rise and bristled. In 1908, he entered the cereal market himself, selling competing products under the Kellogg name. What had once been a hierarchy
became a rivalry. The subordinate had turned into a challenger. Their conflict moved from private resentment to public confrontation. The dispute came down to a fundamental question: who owns a shared identity? When two brothers bear the same surname and both sell food under it, whose name does the public recognize? By 1910, the matter had entered the courts. Both companies used Kellogg on their products, and consumers could not distinguish between them. Each brother claimed legitimacy, each accused the other of deception. An early settlement failed to hold. By 1916, the feud reignited. New products, competing labels, and escalating accusations pushed the case to the Michigan Supreme Court. For a full month, the courtroom became a battleground over legacy. Witnesses dissected decades of shared history: the sanitarium, the invention of cornflakes, the evolution of public trust. The core issue was perception. When Americans saw the name Kellogg in a grocery aisle, whose reputation were they responding to? John Harvey argued from authority. He was internationally renowned, a physician whose ideas had shaped health reform for 40 years. To the public, he insisted, the Kellogg name represented discipline, science, and moral purity. His brother, he claimed, was borrowing credibility he had not earned. Will countered with evidence of influence. He had saturated the nation with advertising. His name, his handwriting, was printed on every box. Grocery shelves, not medical journals, were where the Kellogg name now lived. Consumers associated the word with breakfast, not prescriptions. In December 1920, the court ruled decisively. Will Keith Kellogg was granted exclusive rights to the Kellogg name in the cereal business. His brother was ordered to surrender years of profits earned under the label.
Legally, the battle was over. Personally, the damage was irreversible. From that point on, the brothers avoided one another. Any unavoidable meeting required witnesses. Will refused private conversation. Decades of humiliation, obedience, and resentment had hardened into something beyond reconciliation. They continued their lives in the same city, their shared surname printed across the nation, yet their worlds never overlapped again. Late in life, Will Kellogg admitted something quietly devastating. He had never learned how to play. His childhood faith had condemned leisure. His adulthood had been consumed by work. Joy had always been postponed. At 65, he tried to reclaim it. After remarrying in 1918 to Dr. Carrie Staines, a physician from the sanitarium, he completed the estate at Gull Lake. By 1926, they moved into the manor together. The house was not merely a residence, it was an attempt at recovery. Family filled the space. Grandchildren arrived for extended summers, filling the halls with noise Will had never known as a boy. They ran freely across lawns, played games indoors, and swam in the lake. He watched more than he participated, absorbing what had once been denied to him. His own pleasures were reserved and solitary. He adored silent films and installed projection equipment in the house, hosting regular screenings. In the darkened room, he allowed himself stillness, something he had never been permitted before. Almost immediately, he gave the estate away. The property was deeded to the city of Battle Creek with a single condition: it must always remain a place for public enjoyment. Will and Carrie retained the right to live there for life, but ownership passed outward. It was an act of release as much as generosity. In 1927, Will added a bird sanctuary to the grounds, protecting Canada geese at a time when their numbers were dangerously low. Migratory flocks soon followed. The man-denied childhood play had created sanctuary for others. The calm did not survive history. During World War II, the estate was seized by the U.S. Coast Guard. Will relocated nearby. Carrie moved away. After the war, the property served wounded soldiers from Percy Jones Army Hospital, the same sanitarium where Will had once labored in silence.
Carrie died in 1948, never returning. The house stood empty until Will's death in 1951, at 91 years old. Later, the estate passed to Michigan State University, becoming a biological research station. The house endured, evolving beyond its creator's intentions. What began as a private attempt to reclaim joy became something larger, shared, institutional, and lasting. That single tragedy would cast a shadow over everything that followed. 12 years later, W.K. Kellogg faced another rupture inside his own family. His son, John Leonard Kellogg, had spent 17 years inside the company and was widely regarded as its future leader. He was not merely an executive, he was an inventor. He developed the wax paper liner that kept cereal fresh, helped create All-Bran, and accumulated more than 200 patents. By every professional measure, he was the natural successor. In 1925, his father dismissed him. The reasons had nothing to do with business performance. John Leonard had divorced his wife and married his secretary. He had also purchased an oatmeal company, an act W.K. interpreted not as initiative, but as betrayal. Loyalty, once broken, could not be restored in W.K.'s mind. He severed ties completely, removing his son from the company and from his personal life. They never spoke again. 5 years later, as the Great Depression devastated American families, W.K. Kellogg turned outward. In 1930, he established the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Over the course of his life, he donated $66 million to it, more than half of his personal stake in the Kellogg Company. The mission was focused and unwavering: the health, education, and welfare of children. Perhaps, consciously or not, he was thinking of his injured grandson when he committed his fortune to children he would never know. The foundation funded schools, including one in Battle Creek that became a pioneer in inclusive education for disabled children. It built hospitals and clinics, trained nurses and doctors, and fed children whose parents had nothing during the worst years of the Depression. When praised for his generosity, W.K. rejected the language of sainthood. He said, "I am a selfish person," he said bluntly. "I love doing things for children because I enjoy it."
In 1937, doctors delivered another blow. W.K. was diagnosed with glaucoma. The disease progressed rapidly, and within a few years, he was completely blind. The final decade of his life would be lived in darkness. Blindness did not slow him. He continued attending board meetings. He visited factories, guided by German shepherds descended from the famed Rin Tin Tin line. When executives proposed reducing advertising during hard economic times, W.K. overruled them and ordered an increase of $1 million instead. He believed visibility mattered most when uncertainty was greatest. Then came the loss that finally broke what remained of his private world. After cutting ties with John Leonard, W.K. had turned to his grandson, John Jr., as the next heir. The young man entered the company and rose quickly, but the pressure proved overwhelming. He was demoted. He suffered a mental collapse. In 1938, he took his own life. By the end of the 1930s, W.K. Kellogg's remaining sons had cut off all contact with him. The man whose company fed millions of families no longer had one of his own. He had built permanence in business, but isolation in life. In 1943, John Harvey Kellogg was dying. He was 91 years old. His sanitarium had collapsed financially years earlier. The Seventh-day Adventist Church had expelled him decades before. The physician who once commanded national reverence now approached death stripped of influence and applause. He thought of his brother. 37 years had passed since W.K. walked away from the sanitarium. 23 since the court stripped John Harvey of the right to use his own name on cereal products. They had spoken rarely and never privately. Resentment had hardened into permanence. As his health failed, John Harvey wrote a letter. For the first time, he acknowledged what he had always denied. He admitted that he had exploited his younger brother, minimized his contributions, and treated him unjustly. He expressed remorse. It was an apology decades overdue. The letter arrived at WK's home.
He was 83 and completely blind. Someone would have needed to read it aloud. He chose not to. The envelope remained sealed. On December 14, 1943, John Harvey Kellogg died. Only after his brother was gone did WK finally allow the letter to be read. What he felt in that moment was never recorded, whether regret, validation, or simply the hollow knowledge that reconciliation was now impossible. The brothers who had created cornflakes together would never speak again. WK lived 8 more years. He continued guiding the foundation, remained involved with the company, and showed up, blind, aging, and resolute, to oversee the empire he had built. When death came in 1951, it came quietly. He was 91 years old, the same age his brother had been. The letter had arrived too late, but perhaps it never could have healed what had been done. A quarter-century of humiliation could not be undone with ink. Today, Oak Hill Cemetery rests on a gentle slope in Battle Creek. Among its graves lie reformers, industrialists, and pioneers of American history. And there, side by side, rest the Kellogg brothers. In death, they lie closer than they ever permitted themselves to be in life. The sanitarium that defined John Harvey's world no longer exists as he knew it. Its radical treatments are remembered now as relics of a strange medical age. But the Tudor Manor at Gull Lake still stands. Students and researchers walk the grounds where WK planted full-grown trees because he refused to wait for saplings. And the signature remains. Every morning, in kitchens across the world, bowls are filled from boxes bearing the name W.K. Kellogg wrote more than a century ago. Few think about the brothers behind it, the years of resentment, the family fractures, the cost. W.K. once feared he would always be poor. He was wrong. He became wealthy beyond measure and gave much of it away. He built something that endures. But in one sense, he was right. As a child, he never learned to play, and as a man, he never learned to forgive. The war over the Kellogg name is over now. Only the legacy remains.